Be agreed to. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, adhering to your ruling, I'm going to confine my comments in the same way that the Minister did, and we, Labor, will support this notice of motion because, no, Labor will support this notice of motion because, not because we support in any way, shape or form the asset sales, but because we actually support this Parliament having a level of scrutiny over this entity. Because if this motion was not passed, and by the way, this is another example of a stuff-up by that minister and his government, because the clerk advises me that it is possible to have bundled all these notices of motion, and that could have been done after the original legislation was passed, could have been bundled up so that we're not sitting here doing this in an incremental amateur hour fashion. So we want to examine Meridian Energy as a financial review. If this minister had his way, and if there wasn't enough public outrage, he probably wouldn't put this notice of motion up, because we can't access now the OIA in respect of this organisation. Our powers are rather limited, but at least we have the opportunity, passing this notice of motion, to examine this SOE in respect of the financial review. Now, I said at part of my speech that this is another example of a government stuff-up, because if you look at Meridian Energy, a complete mess. In fact, if you look at the whole mixed ownership model and how it was kicked off and how it was dealt with, we find it was indeed a complete mess. And the Minister talked about high-level government intervention. Well, if ever there was an example of almost micromanagement to the point where the Minister of SOEs, complicit with the Minister of Finance, walked over without telling the board, and they confirmed that when they came and had a chat with us a couple of weeks ago, walked over the board in the dead of night to do a nice little cosy deal with a company called Rio Tinto that made $3.7 billion, I think, US of profits last year. It was this minister. And Meridian Energy, supposed to be independent, had advised the government that they'd reached the bottom line. They couldn't negotiate a deal, and the government swept in, $30 million sweetener thrown in, half the notice period thrown in for Rio Tinto to pull the pin, cheaper electricity price, paraded and wrapped up by this minister as some sort of job guarantee protection scheme for the people of Southland. And if that were true, that would be helpful to the people of Southland. And then we found out on Catherine Ryan's show, where we were both interviewed, when he was asked a really simple question: did you ask for a jobs guarantee in return for all the little bits, for all the corporate welfare that you gave to Rio Tinto? Answer: no. Didn't even have the brains, this minister, or the gumption to ask Rio Tinto for a jobs guarantee. Now, I accept that they may have said no. I accept that. But there's an old adage round here: if you don't ask, you don't get. So what Rio Tinto did, because this government nailed themselves to a time frame, a must-sell time frame, was just sat back, turned the screw, and when they reached the threshold of pain on this government, this minister bent over a barrel, they just sprung the trap. And the problem is next time, because of course Meridian Energy post 217 can pull the pin, the problem is next time that Meridian Energy will just rerun the scenario again. Except this time the board is in even a weaker situation, because this minister came over the top and put the sweeteners in the corporate welfare. So the board will go in with very little moral authority, very little leverage, when Rio Tinto, as we know they will do, will spring the trap and say, well, we might have to pull the pin and get out of here because of Bill English's ineptitude and stupidity. And I've got to say, the week, it was reported in the Southland Times, the week before the ink was dry on the cheque of the $30 million, Rio Tinto was already making, I think they were machinists, redundant. They were already into restructuring mode the week Bill English signed the cheque before the ink was dry. And he had the audacity to come into this House and portray this, and to answer to every parliamentary question, this protects Southland jobs. Well, we know that that was totally untrue, because that minister did not even have the brains or the gumption to ask for a job guarantee. This is also the minister, along with his outgoing, retiring colleague, Tony Ryle, who I'm sure, there's a tradition around here when you leave, they give you, I think, a silver tray. In his case, I think it'll be a silver candelabra. But along with that minister, who will go down in history as the worst, most negligent SOE minister in our history, a man who stood by with Solid Energy, stood by and just let it all happen. Told them to borrow more, told them he wanted more dividends, ramped up their gearing to around 42%, when mineral companies have about 0 to 10% gearing. And Ms Dunphy, who is the acting chair of Solid Energy, told the Commerce Committee today, the question was put to her, if you had a gearing ratio similar to other international minerals companies, that is 0 to 10, had you had that, would we be in the dire straits with that company as we are today? Would we be in as dire straits? Answer, no, we wouldn't be. We wouldn't be. Oh, well, of course, Mr Palmer was sort of waxing eloquently and orbiting a stratosphere a number of us haven't been to, because he couldn't agree. They kept arguing about the price of coal, not arguing about how you manage the path of the price of coal. He also, of course, indeed, yep, I'm getting to that. Here, we're not up to 8 minutes yet, but I take your point, sir. Mr Palmer, of course, confirmed that the government had put pressure on them to increase their borrowing ratios. So in respect of Meridian Energy, the two shareholding ministers, Mr Ryle and Mr English, have presided over a complete debacle. These were the ministers who said originally, in fact it was the Prime Minister who said the original figure for the mixed ownership model sales would be around $10 million. Then it went down and sold to mum and dads. Then it went down to about $8 million. Then it was 7, then it was 5 to 7. And now we know that the total amount, not including Genesis, which is the smallest of the lot, is around $3.93 billion. That's a great success, according to Bill English and Tony Ryle. And how many New Zealanders? Well, very, very few. You look at Mighty River, less than 2%. You look at Mighty River, gained just 113,000 so-called mum and dads. And then we find out that includes, of course, companies and trusts. Then you had the Meridian Energy, the one we're debating at the moment, 63,000 mum and dad shareholders signed up, half as much as MRP a short time later. And then, of course, less than 0.1% of the population signed up for Air New Zealand. And this is widespread mum and dad-like public ownership. And, of course, those people who did sign up for MRP, of course, have taken a bath. Meridian has basically flatlined, and Air New Zealand, who knows where it'll go. So I say to Mr English, the gall of the man to stand up and somehow take credit and somehow say that this mixed ownership model has worked. This mixed ownership model, he says very successful. I say this to Mr English. If his Prime Minister was still working for Merrill Lynch, good deal for taxpayers. Well, I say this, what planet is that member on? Because normally when you sell something, you try and maximise the return for the owner. And if John Key had still been Merrill Lynch, he would have said to the owner, that is the taxpayer, you're not going to maximise a return on these assets if you sell them now, or probably if you sell them in the future, pull the pin. So the taxpayer could have got between 10 and 7, and then it was $5 and $7 billion, and the poor old taxpayers washed up in a fire sale of $3.93 billion plus a few dollars thrown in with Genesis over the top. That's a disgrace. That's a fire sale, and that's selling most of it to your mates, because we know what happened under Mad Max Bradford. Contact Energy, predominantly Kiwi-owned, then the share register, sir, of course, changed, now overwhelmingly foreign-owned. And we know what will happen to the dividends of Meridian. Half of them will end up, of course, not in the public purse. 1 or 2 shekels might go to the odd mum and dad shareholder, and the rest will head overseas. Really smart economics, really smart. Ridiculous, a fire sale. And the reason that he says very successful, well, he'll take that to the grave, he'll take that to his political grave, all right, that'll be on his headstone. That will be on his headstone. And mum and dads who used to own 100% of these shares and get the benefit of 100% of those dividends know that he sold the family silver in a fire sale.
The members. I'm calling Julianne Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising